This is Father Bonaventure Chapman.
And this is Father Patrick Briscoe.
And welcome to Godsplaining. And thanks to all those who support us. If you enjoy the show, please consider making a monthly donation on Patreon. Be sure to like and subscribe to Godsplaining wherever you listen to your podcasts. Dear listeners and dear viewers, because the viewers will notice something very different, we are doing a Guestsplaining episode. We're very excited to have Dr. Andrew Abela, Dean of the Busch School of Business at the Catholic University of America. Dean Abela, welcome.
Delighted to be here.
This is, beautiful accent too. This is a first in many ways, but it is first where we have a Guestsplaining episode in our studio. Up until this point, this has been a Dominican-only sort of place.
I'm very pleased about this because that means, Professor, that you are the best dressed and best spoken guest that we've ever had in the studio.
You set the standard.
So everyone else has to live up to
not just the
what
best
we do
guest,
here.
maybe, but actually the best person and best dressed in the
That's true,
studio
yeah.
and best spoken.
Yes.
And the longest traveled. I came all the way across the street.
That's true. That's true. Well, you know, Father Joseph Anthony does come from UVA, so sometimes he's in here. But
But he's not a guest, you know.
That's true. Yeah, it's true. There's
longest traveled
lots
guest.
of firsts. Well, let me introduce our special guest. Dr. Andrew Abela is the founding dean of the Busch School of Business at the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C., a fine institution. An affiliate faculty member at Harvard, if you've heard of that, university's Human Flourishing Program. He's award-winning, cited many research on integrity and effectiveness in business. He speaks to business leaders, cultivates the Superhabits, which we're talking about. He's also published a number of books on top of the one that we're talking about. Prior to the academic career, Dr. Abela was a brand manager at Procter Gamble and a management consultant for McKinsey Company, and he survived to tell the tale. And he has an MBA from the Institute for Management Development in Switzerland and a PhD from the Darden School of Business at the University of Virginia, Father Joseph Anthony's current locale. So, Dr. Abela, we're here to talk to you about a brand new book that is a product of a lot of research. The book, for those of you who can see in the background, and I have a nice little list here, is called Superhabits. Superhabits, the Universal System for a Successful Life. So, tell us about what is this? What's the book project? How did you write it or decide to write it? And then, as Dominicans, we want to talk a little about what these superhabits are.
So, the book is about virtue. And the problem with virtue is most people who aren't Dominicans don't really understand it. Even really well-formed people. When you say you want somebody to be virtuous, people usually mean be good. And that's just not very helpful. Because yes, of course you should be good. They don't understand that virtue is a habit of excellence. Right? Mm-hmm. At the same time, there are several books about habits that have sold millions of copies. Mm-hmm. And so here I'm thinking, there are all these books about habits, telling people how to develop habits, and no one's saying anything about which habits you should be developing. And we know that the virtues are habits par excellence. They are the best habits to have. In fact, they're kind of like superpowers, you know.
Yes.
Because as you grow, you practice a certain virtue, it just gives you so much more capable as a human being. And so I came up with the name Superhabits. So it's sort of a superpower habit.
Yeah.
And so the book, I originally wanted to call it a virtue and owner's guide or something creative like that.
Yes.
And I had several people in business, this is very sad, said, so not only do people misunderstand the word virtue, some people don't like it. So I've had people in business say, you know, it sounds like a terrific book, but if you call it virtue, I can't buy it for my people at work because I can't buy religious stuff and it would be religious.
Oh my goodness.
So you see how they misunderstand so terribly. But anyway, so I called it Superhabits.
Well, I like that Superhabits title because we in the Dominican world have trouble with this too. When we learn about the virtues, they are habits, but we oftentimes call them like habitus. It's different because habits are those kind of nervous tics. It could be anything, right? Yes. It could be just I have a habit of, for instance, drinking coffee in the morning. But there's no virtue of coffee drinking in the morning. It might be virtuous to do so, but it's not a specific virtue of that. Whereas these super habits, I love this label, and I want to, what you came up with, is it from the superpowers thing? But because it gets to, it's a deeper habit, which is what the virtues are, the deeper of habits that structure all of the other activities, which I love the super habits. And as a side, I'll probably use when I mention virtue to other contexts and situations, when people might think, oh, virtue, you mean like old lady's piety or something, or like being good. And it's like, no, I just mean super habits, like excellent habits. Yeah, I love that.
There you go.
No,
fantastic. Well, yeah, and there's a whole, as you know, philosophical debate about whether habit is a proper translation for habitus. And
Yes.
I think it was Yves Simon and Anton Peggy. And now I'm not a professor of philosophy. I'm a professor of marketing. Right? So I tell my colleagues, this is not a work of philosophy. This is just a straight out attempt to sell virtue to the modern world. you know?
Yes.
So and that's what I do best, is promote and sell. And so I tried to write the book in a way to make it interesting. So there's lots of interesting, fun stories to read. So it reads like a. Actually, the kindest compliment I got from a reviewer was, "This book is a work of deep philosophy masquerading as a self-help book." And that was a great compliment on both sides. I guess
Yes.
it's a nice compliment to call it work. I don't think deep, but I think I tried to be philosophical. But that it actually came across as a self-help book is sort of what I wanted, because that's the genre that I want people to take it. And so there's just so many, tens of thousands of self-help books, some of them good, some not so much. And yet at the heart of any self-improvement effort should be an attempt to grow in virtue.
Yes.
Right.
And there isn't an easy book to pick up and say, hey, there's lots of wonderful books about virtue, well written. But part of the problem is every one of them focuses on a different set of virtues. So think of Father Guardini's book. My former boss, John Garvey, wrote a terrific book on the virtues.
Yeah.
Donald DeMarco has a book on the virtues. There's several. Bennett, forget his name. Anyway, but they usually overlap on the cardinal virtues, thank God.
Yes.
But
Yeah,
then
hard
beyond
not to.
that's
Yes.
about that's it.
Yes.
And you feel sorry for people. I've used some of those books in my classes, but how do you explain to students kind of, is there just this unlimited set of virtues? Is every positive abstract noun a virtue?
Right.
Yes.
Is innovation a virtue? Is tolerance a virtue? And so at a certain point, I was looking for some kind of framework that said, okay, there's this set of super habits, and it's a comprehensive set, and there could be a bunch of them, but that's it. So you and I found it in St. Thomas Aquinas. Who was a Franciscan, I think.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Now,
Well known.
I
Very
see
President Bird
Father
Bats.
Bonaventure has a little diagram here, so he loves his props, as you know. Before we get into that, I would like to ask one question about this, that I think it gets at this a little bit further, because I think you propose virtue, and I sympathize. I understand with why people would think, oh, there's a kind of religious inclination, and I could see why people in business might be nervous about that, because it would seem that being a good businessman, being successful in business, would be opposed to a lot of the virtues that are prized by Christianity. For example, compassion. Can a compassionate businessman really be a successful person? We don't have to really get into that question, because that could be a little bit thornier. But I do want to ask about this seeming opposition between religious virtue and success in the business world. Is it possible, really, to ground a kind of theory in business in the religious tradition and to succeed as a businessman?
Terrific. It's a great question. And if the answer were in the negative, then I'd be out of a job. Because we created...
It seems like you value your soul to me.
Well, I do. And the Busch School of Business, which is only 11 and a bit years old, was founded. I had the privilege of being the founding dean. We founded the school exactly to show how to do that. So how to be specifically a good Christian, a faithful Catholic, and be successful in business. It had to be both, because who's going to pay tuition to go study business in a way that's not going to ever make any money? And in fact, that's ultimately a false understanding of business. So my last book before this one, 10 years ago, I seem to write a book every 10 years or so. It takes that long. Was called A Catechism for Business. And it's a collection of all that we could find, church teaching related to business, economy, and so on. And it's a delight when you pull it all together, because you realize that, yes, absolutely, not only can you be successful in the business world and be a faithful Catholic, but everything I've seen in terms of theory and research about long-term success in business is entirely consistent with what the church teaches about human flourishing and kind of living a good sort of earthly life. So there really, in the long term, there isn't a contradiction there. So there isn't a contradiction between virtuous as we understand it, even in completely religious terms, and being successful in business. Because the idea that being successful in business is making as much money as you can and then getting out of town isn't really kind of business success. That's usually people who end up in jail do that. You know, so
Yes.
it's not a great marker of success.
Yes, that's right. Well, and I want to defend this and support this as well because I taught in Providence College a business ethics course. I taught it because many of the philosophers, they just didn't like teaching business ethics or something. They didn't think it was a real discipline or something. And I thought, well, I just love business. It's great. I mean, I think these men can be virtuous. And so I used a lot of the work of Robert Solomon, who was, I don't know if you're familiar with him.
I met him, yeah.
Oh, he's a fantastic philosopher from the University of Texas, Austin. He was a specialist in Nietzsche, but also talked a lot about a philosophy of love. He was really a spectacular man, but brought, in some ways, in the 80s, I think it was, brought virtue ethics into business with his Ethics of Excellence, which I think is a tremendous text, and then a number of other texts and taught in these sort of things. So I always taught with a virtue mindset that there are particular virtues and aspects of being a businessman, just like there are virtues in all these things. Yep. And the best businessman is going to be a virtuous one in the sense of being excellent in these human things. So whenever I don't teach business ethics anymore, but it was a delightful course. I really did enjoy it, and I think the students enjoyed it too. I always told them, look, you know, you're the most helpful people to the world right now. So don't let anyone tell you that you're not doing ethical things here. You're doing things. But that's a side point, because what I want to do is the specific virtues. So I loved, there's a number of virtues here, and you start off with restraint and humility and diligence. But I really liked the gentle firmness one, because gentle firmness, of course, it is one of the traditional ones, as you point out in the chapter, under a different name. But maybe go through with a little bit before we get the system view.
Sure.
These specific virtues. So tell us something about gentle firmness. In each of the, by the way, dear listener and dear viewer, each of the chapters is structured as a beautiful. It's a nice entrance because it has a story that draws you in, and then it kind of teaches you the particular virtue that's involved in it. And the opening is really fantastic about that. How the Mayans, I think it is, have this. There's an earthquake, and the old buildings that had the ancient wisdom survive, whereas the new modern ones don't. Yeah. And so it's like, well, we have this, ancient wisdom. So fantastic, good sell. But tell me a little about your favorite specific virtues that might catch people off guard. Eutrapelia is a favorite one for us Dominicans. But tell us a little about about gentle firmness, maybe, and eutrapelia. So
part of the problem, I think, with virtue is so much of what we know about virtue is hidden in plain sight, because the words have lost their meanings. Mm-hmm. So I talked about the word virtue itself as sort of exhibit A. But so many other names of virtues mean something so different to the modern ear.
Temperance.
Like temperance, for example, is the old ladies' temperance league or whatever, right?
The opposite, in fact.
Right, yeah. So the meekness is a problematic one, because the proper understanding of meekness is a sort of strength clothed in a gentleness, right? So, but it sounds like weakness, and I think for many people they just equate the two. Yeah. But we know that Moses was meek, and there's nothing weak about him, right? And Christ himself says, "I am meek and humble of heart." So, and there's nothing weak about him either. And so, I had a lot of fun working through, as I was writing the book, going back to the original Latin names of each of that Thomas uses for each of the virtues. And then I had very handy Latin to English dictionary by my predecessor, provost of Catholic University, Dr. Roy Di Ferrari, who was a great classics scholar and wrote, he was the author or editor of this dictionary. So what I would do is I would look at the original Latin name and then look at Di Ferrari's possible English translations and pick one that made the most sense, I think, to the modern ear. So, for example, paciencia is always translated as patience. Yep. But that's not what Thomas meant, right? His definition is basically enduring in long sorrow, which is very different from, be patient.
Waiting for something.
Right, yeah, yes. Yeah. So, but we have a word that means enduring in long sorrow, which is resilience, right? And there's all kinds of psychological research on resilience that affirms the things that Thomas told us 750 years ago. So what I try to do in the book is I'm telling stories, but I'm bringing what Thomas told us about the virtues with the contemporary psychological research, and they fit together beautifully. I think it's a common thing for social science to spend years and years proving what we already knew to be true, you know. But
Yes.
but it for the modern ear,
It's
it helps
fine.
when you can say studies show that.
Yes,
you know.
exactly, yes.
So that was resilience, and then for meekness, the Latin name, as I'm sure you know, is mansuetudo. So there's an English word mansuetude, which is completely useless.
Yeah.
No one knows what that means.
Well, it's a
right?
great
Well,
word
I've
for
got one
parties.
right
It's
here,
fantastic.
actually,
It's a fantastic party word.
Well,
Yeah.
yes, but that's about it. So I thought, well, let me just invent a word.
Yeah.
And meekness is gentleness and firmness together.
Mm-hmm.
It's not even a, you know, we all know that virtue has the mean between two extremes, excess and defect. It's not the case that sort of gentleness would be one extreme and firmness would be the other. No. It's simultaneously you are gentle and you are firm at the same time. It's the proverbial, you know, velvet glove over a steel fist,
Yes.
you know. And I think people start to understand it better when you talk about gentle firmness. Like, okay, I think I understand what you're talking about. I tell the story in the book about the horrible My Lai massacre.
Yes.
And the captain, the helicopter pilot who put a stop to it by landing right in the middle of it between some blood-crazed soldiers and innocent civilians and said, hey, come on, let's stop this. You know, if he was furious, we know from contemporary accounts of his navigator with him saying that he was absolutely furious when he saw what was going on. He landed, and you can imagine if he got out of the helicopter and started screaming at them, things might have ended worse, you know. They probably would have shot him too, you know. But if he'd run away terrified, things would have been terrible as well. But instead, he got down. He was very calm, and he said, "Okay, I'll take care of things here." And he just kind of put an end to the whole thing, you know. So gentle firmness is a very, very powerful virtue. But when we call it meekness, I don't think people get it. So
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
You've been working with young people now for a number of years, both the undergraduates who are attending the Busch School or young professionals who come for graduate degrees, surely. What do you think is the most difficult super habit for them to cultivate? Which do you think is the most foreign to the atmosphere that people swim in today?
Gosh, that's a tough question because there are so many.
All of them.
I mean, so I in the book I treat them in a certain order that I think follows what Augustine talked about, because we normally talk about them in the order of prudence, justice, fortitude, temperance, but you develop them, I think, in the reverse order, right? So there's a hierarchy with prudence at the top, but it's you want to start with temperance or self-discipline, because if you have no self-discipline, then you are the slave of your passions, you know. And really, there's no hope for anything at all at that point. You're just going to give in to whatever feeling you have in the moment. So that's first. And I think for many young people, that's the place where you begin. You know?
What's interesting about that is that kind of dovetails with the resurgent interest in Stoicism, a kind of discipline that is a guide and order to life that allows the cultivation of other priorities to happen.
Yeah.
So that's a very interesting point that you mentioned that in your response here, because I think we're seeing a kind of longing for that in this trend of resurgent Stoicism.
I think I agree. There's books by Ryan Holiday, who's done a lot I think, to popularize the Stoics, and I think really good stuff. But there's so much more to be said. Like if you stop at Stoicism, it's like, come on, you're just beginning. You know, it's like there's a much greater life waiting for you. Yeah.
So I want to ask about the system, but before I do that, I want to ask a kind of a Thomistic question, you could say, or at least, I don't know, maybe praise you for the balance you've given to this, in the sense that you could have, many times people would say, I'm going to do the psychological research and all of that, and then I'm just going to grab Thomistic terms, the virtues and the super habits, as you say, and use that as a wedge or something, or maybe just tags for things. Or you could go in the other extreme and just say, I'm going to just read Thomas out loud, and then we'll grab some psychological research and kind of, sprinkle it on willy-nilly as it's valuable and not valuable. But this book strikes me as striking the balance between the two as a nice mean, but clearly centered in the fact that the Thomistic account, the virtues that are put out there, the ancient virtues in the system, are the kind of bedrock. There's something true about that regardless, but that we're not surprised that the empirical research, all these studies show this sort of thing. So it's nice that, because you could either ignore one, ignore the other, or just combine them, helter-skelter.
Yeah.
But you have the base, but always kind of tied to, if people read the book, as we'll see in there, the kind of real findings, not only real life stories, but then also some research from cognitive science and that sort of thing. Were you concerned about like how you're going to put together the traditional model with this, or did it always seem just so clear to you that, well, of course the traditional model of these virtues is valuable, and therefore I expect to see this research that kind of dovetails nicely with this? Or was that kind of always an exciting kind of discovery, you could say?
It was a lot of discovery, but one of the things I like about the social sciences is when they're done honestly, they tend to find some element of truth, right? Because they're trying to look at reality. Now, they're not always done honestly, but the work of positive psychology, the field, by and large, I've been really impressed with. They've done really good work, and as I say, it's just been a delight when I discover that they found what Thomas said without even knowing maybe even of his existence. Just found things that. So, for example, diligence is one. So he explains that diligence, which is part of self-discipline, right, part of temperance, is not kind of clench your teeth, bear down, and study hard. It's fall in love with the subject, right? So it's not. You temper your curiosity, right, and instead redirect it towards something more productive. Well, wouldn't you know, when you read the social science, the psychology on helping students grow in diligence, it's all about helping them fall in love with the subject. So it's just nice to see that sort of resonance. Well, I was biased in favor of Thomas from the get-go because my wife is a graduate of Thomas Aquinas College, and so she taught me early on that everything important comes from Thomas. Can be found in the Summa. So no,
what a marvelous woman.
Right. I'm very blessed.
She's on next time.
Yeah. I've used Thomas over the years in my class when we teach about private property or teach about just price and so on. So he's such a clear thinker that I thought, okay, if I go to him for the virtues, and I'd read through the treatise on the virtues a couple of times, and there's a lot to absorb there. But then somebody recommended, Dean Capizzi, my colleague who heads theology, recommended Father Romanus Cesario's book on the virtue or the examined life, which is his sort of explanation of the or tour guide of this, and that was so helpful in terms of just kind of all of a sudden it started to click that Thomas isn't just giving you a list of virtues; he's actually building a system.
Oh, yes.
And
that's a perfect
if I talk
segue.
about that?
Well, but the thing is, you compare that then with the positive psychology work, and there's a book now in second or third edition called the Handbook of Positive Psychology, Handbook of Character and Virtue, something like that. Anyway, there's the introductory chapter says, what we're presenting here is explicitly not a system, not a taxonomy, because a taxonomy presumes a larger view of the world. We're not doing that. We're just giving you a catalog.
Yes.
And who knows, there may be more, It's like, well, what's the point? The virtues together are sort of a blueprint for human flourishing. But if I said to you, here's a blueprint for human flourishing, there may be a bunch of holes in it. I don't know. I'm not going to make any claims.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, so I look at that, and it's almost like they went out of their way to change their catalog to make it just a little different enough from the traditional views of the virtues. So I thought that was a bit of a shame, but it's work done by a committee, so maybe that's not surprising. But there's a lot of really good work there. It just doesn't come together as well as I would like. So then when I saw Thomas's framework, I thought, well, this is beautiful.
And so what I like also about the book is you introduce the virtues straight off the bat, or the superhabits, some of them as examples. It's a good teaching method. And then you start telling what the difference between a habit and a superhabit is, and people already, you remind them what they've already in a sense known, and then you read some more, and then you get the system. So then you're told about the system of these things that you already prepare. You've seen this before. So when anyone who's worried about a system or like an easy, thing, they're already, you've already committed to this because you've been enjoying the book so far and you've agreed with me so far. But you do have a system, and there's, again, readers, or if you're on the road, do not turn your eyes from the screen. But there's this beautiful anatomy of virtue chart here, which I'm sure anyone can find on the internet as well. Yeah. Anatomy of virtue, which looks, tremendously daunting. I'm excited about it because I like charts. It is massive. It has all these different virtues. So what is this thing, and how did you get this whole systematic view here? Which systematic seems wrong. Systematic seems like something we create as like our own grouping of an arbitrary thing, but maybe more integral. So this is like an integrated units. These super habits are integrated in systematic, but not like human construction systematic, because we get pick and choose, but rather they respond to the integral whole that is the human person.
What I tried to do with the graphic was give a visual representation of what Thomas talks about in the Summa, in his treatise, because it's the completeness of the thing
that's what I mean, the integral kind of thing.
Exactly, yeah. But the reason you can know that it's complete is he starts with the whole of human life, and then he makes a series of distinctions. So he starts with the supernatural and the natural, okay. And every one of those distinctions is simultaneously kind of complete and non-overlapping. And if you keep doing that, then you know that the ending result is going to be complete. The reason I don't start with that as the first chapter is I get really geeky when I get excited about this, and a lot of people look at me and say, "Why does it matter? Why are you so excited that it's complete and that you can prove it's complete?"
Yes.
Well, first, because we've done something that the positive psychology, all their brilliant minds, hundreds of them, maybe thousands now, over 30 years, couldn't do, which is come up with a comprehensive system. And here we have one. And it's demonstrably, logically, provably complete. So you can't say, well, I just thought about a virtue and it doesn't fit on your... No, it must. It'll be there somewhere. Because you start out with... So he starts out with supernatural and natural.
Yes.
Okay, that's first distinction. And so for the supernatural virtues, we have, of course, faith, hope, and charity. Then the natural, he says, let's split into... I say split. There are always distinctions, right? Because you're not dividing, you're just distinguishing between intellectual and practical. So intellectual, we have the intellectual virtues, wisdom, science, and so on. Then where I spend most of my focus and most of the book is on the practical life. Sort of your everyday kind of, because again, I run a business school, so it's just everyday working life and family life and so on. And then, so he makes, within practical life, he makes a distinction between what in philosophy we would say the intellect, will, and passions, right? But I make a further loose translation to thoughts, actions, and feelings, right?
Yeah.
Or cognitive, behavioral, and affective, if you wanted to get psychological, But it's sort of clearly complete, because if you say to somebody, okay, in your everyday life, so other than your prayer life, other than thought for thought's sake, you have practical thoughts, actions, and feelings. Is there anything else? No, that's pretty much it. That's what happens, right? And so then he takes one further distinction in the feelings. He says we have feelings that attract us, our desires, feelings that repel us, our fears. So thoughts, actions, fears, desires, prudence, justice, fortitude, temperance, right? Prudence, the habit of making wise decisions. Justice, the habit of treating others fairly and with respecting their dignity. Fortitude or courage, the habit of basically continuing to move forward even though you might be afraid. And then temperance or self-discipline, the habit of only following your desires when it makes sense to do so. So now he's explained why those four. I've had people ask me in class, well, why are there four cardinal virtues? Well, here's your answer. Because if you have those four, every aspect of your daily life is taken care of.
That's why the cardinal, the hinge ones.
Right.
And then they keep,
all of life pivots on them, but then there's numerous others that pivot on them, and that's then the other rings on the...
Yes.
And so you end up with 50 virtues around the outside, 50, which may seem like a lot, but over the course of a lifetime, you could do 50. Whereas if there were an indeterminate number, then it's like... I like the idea of character education. I don't like the idea of schools who do virtue of the week. It's like, really? So I'm going to go on forever and there'll be a new virtue every week. So just as I'm getting to understand it.
Yes, they sort of seem to invent them, like the good shoe tying and the...
So this is
the
like...
worthy habit wearing and whatever else.
Right? No, it's like this, okay, these 50, that's what they are. Anything else fits in. And so going on at some length, I say I do nerd out about this, but... originally, I drew it like a tree because that's what the medievals drew. Right? They drew the tree of virtues. You have pictures of them here, right in the house. But the problem with the tree is that you can always imagine another branch. So the tree doesn't signify completeness. So you have the big branches that are the cardinal virtues, and then the smaller ones that
keep going.
And it's like, okay, so your virtue a week, add another branch, And so actually, it's a friend of mine I was chatting with about this, and I was pulling the older version of the tree out of my briefcase. I said, you got to see this thing I came up with, And he goes, oh, great, because I had already told him about Superhabits and the framework and so on. He goes, I hope it's not some dumb like family tree design. And I was like, put it back in the
Right,
case.
yes.
So I thought, okay, he's challenging me. I have to find another way to convey this completeness. So the idea of a circle
which
is
is
complete.
always complete, but can expand to make more detail about things and yet stay complete.
Exactly,
Yes.
exactly. And the nice thing is the picture looks like, so you staying with the tree motif, it looks like a cross section of a tree trunk, right? And then the outer ring, this is the analogy works really well. The outer ring are the virtues, and if you know trees, you know that disease comes in when the bark is damaged.
Yes.
Right. So when you are lacking one or more of
One
those virtues,
that's
where
lets
the,
in. Damn. Yep.
Yep, that's what the devil is gonna comes at you like
There's
wherever.
almost one
right?
virtue a week too. You could do, and you have 2 weeks off. You can just kind of lounge about.
Those are the vacation weeks.
Yeah. So it is
Those are the
virtues a
weeks for
week.
the
Yeah.
The
all-inclusives.
eutropelia one. Yeah.
Yes, that's right.
But so when I was a deacon at St. Matthew's Cathedral, I was doing my first baptisms. And of course, the first question at a baptism is, what do you ask for so-and-so? And the correct response in the ceremony is for baptism. And the parents present the child, right? And they ask for baptism for their child. And I hadn't coached this family particularly well. I said, so what do you ask of? And what do you ask of the church for young so-and-so? And the grandfather answered on behalf of the family, and he listed off a whole set of dreams for the child. We want him to be married and to be wealthy and to have a good home and to it just listed off this whole dream in it, and it went on for some time before I could find a creative way to make it stop. But
Yes, all those things are very wonderful. What about baptism?
Right,
Is
right.
anyone interested in
How
that?
about that?
Yeah.
so at the risk of prompting a question that could go on as one would answer, what do you wish of the church for so and so? So I ask, what are the benchmarks for the successful life that you're proposing here? What is it that you hope a person walks away with an understanding or a goal or a vision of life that is different because they've read this book, because they've developed these super habits?
So I'll be as concise as I can. I want them to realize first that there is a blueprint for a flourishing life. It's not like, well, whatever you feel like, or there's 17 different options. Like the reason I use "the" in the subtitle, the system for universal system, is because it is the one. And since the ancients, like through thousands of years, for millennia, we have known this is the way to live. So there's that. But then the second thing I hope for is that they will try one. Mm-hmm. They'll go, oh, I'm not a very orderly person. Well, that's just because you don't have the virtue, the habit of orderliness. But you take a little practice every day. Maybe each morning you can write down one thing or two things that you would like to accomplish that day. That's all. Very simple. Take you a minute. And at the end of the day, go back and say, did I do that? Oh, I did. Or I didn't. Doesn't matter. That'll eventually become a checklist, eventually become a to-do list. And then slowly you'll develop the habit of orderliness. And then you'll realize, okay, I was able to do that. Maybe now I can grow in the courage, in the virtue of courage, or gentle firmness, So with our students, I hope that in their 4 years with us, they will have grown in at least one virtue that is important to them, and then realize that I can do this again and again, and eventually get all 50. So that's what I hope for. And wealth and marriage and
yes, and all those other things
and
that
baptism.
Matt mentioned, and baptism, of course.
Yeah.
Well, I do love the sense of that the self-help, as you said, the philosophical and self-help. That it has all the benefits of the self-help aspect of actually making people's lives better.
Yes.
Right, and not as like and the church cares about that. Everyone
Yes.
cares about that because God wants us to be happy with Him in heaven, and that sometimes inclines He wants us to be happy here. Well, of course, as He's created us for goodness and happiness and joy and eudaimonia and all of these kind of fun words we say. But so it has that kind of really practical self-help, but grounded with the power of the ancient tradition.
Yeah.
So this isn't, as you say, a random collection of like guru notes or newest pop psychology or this kind of. And it's not a gimmick, right? It's a tradition that has this applicability to it in this self-help or self-sustaining or developing character formation. So it's got both the. Yeah, it's the theory and the practice combined nicely and balanced. It's quite an achievement, actually. It's quite an achievement.
You have thousands of years of the most brilliant minds telling you this is the surest way to have a life that is happier, healthier, easier, and more effective. Like, what are you waiting for? Right?
Yes, yes, and that's great. Well, Dean Abela, we're really grateful to have you on this show here, and we hope that all the the listeners will pick up, it's not just a book for business students, obviously, it's a book for humans, who want to flourish in life and grow closer to God and those neighbors around them, fulfilling the great commandments in their lives. And but they can find other things. So one is they can obviously go to CUA and study under you, which is very important. So everyone wants to do that. But also, what are the resources? Where else can they find your things or notes about this virtue other than the book, which is available? Where else can they find information about what you're up to and what you do?
So on Substack, I post roughly once a week some sort of additional material to the book, and that's at superhabit.substack.com. It's superhabit in the singular, because someone else grabbed the plural, so and it's not doing anything with it.
Yeah.
So there's that. If you're on LinkedIn, I try to post something there every day, just a little bit about virtue. I write for Forbes online, Forbes.com, so every couple of weeks, so you can find my work. And there, that particular focus is on the role of virtue in business, and I'm writing it for a business audience. So that's,
wonderful. That's plenty, and we will link all those in the show notes. So. Back to our listeners, thanks for listening to this episode of Godsplaining. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, X, Instagram, or whatever. Like, subscribe, leave a 5-star review. If it's worthy of a 5-star review, this one, definitely. If you'd like to donate to the podcast through Patreon, please do so. Follow the link in the description. You can also follow links in the show notes for descriptions about shopping Godsplaining merch, our sort of business, you could say, the business wing of the Godsplaining empire, and to get information about upcoming Godsplaining retreats and days of recollection, those sort of things, and also notes to Dina Abela's book and all of these sort of the tie-ins that we mentioned here. So know of our prayers for you. Please pray for us, and we'll catch you next time on Godsplaining.